and he has managed to get a line established with us. Said, what is going on out on the streets of Cairo?
Well, right now there's a curfew. There's been a curfew since 6 o'clock, but since 18 hours. It's about an hour and a half ago. But I don't think that the curfew is being honored, because the police has suddenly disappeared. You can hardly see any police around. The central, the ones dressed in black with shields and sticks, they've been withdrawn. And apparently the army, some army trucks have moved into the center of town to protect the television and radio station. But there are people around trying to break into the television and radio station. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is just next to it, and they're also trying to break into it. I've heard some shots, but they may not be live bullets. They may just be canisters, these anti-demonstration canisters. But I can see one of the police trucks has been put on fire. So I don't think people are taking any notice of the curfew.
You were out earlier.
Are pretty empty where I am. I'm across the river from the other side. I can see the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from where I am. But I can see a lot of smoke, which is from the the canisters that they use against demonstrations.
That's the sense we've gotten throughout the day as well, Mr. Zulficar, that really the police have tried to separate these groups of protesters. I mean, they all came out from their different mosques as the day began, and it really seemed to be pockets of protest, and they've just basically blocked any attempts for these protesters to get together, gain numbers, and therefore gain momentum. Have you had any information as to what's going on in Tahrir Square, where we know that protesters have been trying to get there and gather all together?
Well, I heard that the police have withdrawn from Tahrir Square. There's no police there anymore. The central, the security services, the guys in black with the shields, these are young conscripts from the army who were rejected from the army because they're illiterate. So they put them in the security services, and all they have to do is to bash people up in demonstrations. But they ran away, apparently. Some fraternized. I was on the other side of the river, and I saw them fraternizing with the people. They were chatting with them. They refused to. Well, they didn't use any bullets or anything like that. There was fraternization. Now, what's happened in Alexandria is the whole city of Alexandria is in the hands of the demonstrations. The police has completely disappeared in Alexandria. Alexandria is a city of 5 million people.
Yep.
And the police has just disappeared.
What about the presence of army tanks? Because one assessment at the moment is that the police have...
There are some APCs, what they call the armored personnel carriers, have moved in front of the television station, but not many of them, something like 15 or 16. And there has been some fraternization with the demonstrators.
And what about numbers?
When the army came in.
What about numbers from when you were out on the streets?
No, when I was out, the demonstration I went to was a very sort of bourgeois demonstration of... I live on an island just across from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and it's a residential island called Zamalek, and there must have been about 3,000 people in my demonstration. There were very few policemen. They just let us go by. It was a very peaceful. We went in front of the Tunisian embassy and clapped, but it's Friday, so the embassies are all closed. But nothing happened. We just went around. Then when I tried to cross the bridge, there was a big police cordon, and although they allowed me to go, but when I went through the police cordon, by the time I just got 50 meters further, there was so much of this mustard gas in the air that you couldn't keep your eyes open. So I had to move back.
So really, the situation...
I could hear some gunshots, but they may not be live bullets, because I believe one person was killed. A woman was killed in Tahrir Square this morning.
I'd wonder...
Another person was killed in Suez today. But there have been demonstrations all over the country. In Mahalla Kubra, which is an industrial center in the center of the Delta, there were over 100,000 people in the street. In Mansoura, which is up in the north by the Mediterranean, north of the Delta, 40,000 people in the street. In Damietta, the same thing, and they burned police stations there.
I'd just like to know,
there have been demonstrations in all the southern cities. What is happening is, I think the police is not, the security services are not able to contain the public wrath, which is generalized. It's really a public wrath. And I just heard Hillary Clinton saying that all we need is to have some social and economic reforms. That's absolute bullshit. What everybody wants is for this government to leave, to go, the regime to come to an end, They're fed up with the people who've been misrunning this country for 30 years.
Mr. Zulficar.
And all the slogans I heard had nothing to do with the cost of living. The slogans were all, we want the end of this regime.
Mr. Zulficar, it's live
we
TV.
Want Mubarak to go.
No more swearing, please. Just a few more questions. The information that you're getting, of course, you're there on the ground, but it'll be interesting to note, state TV, Egyptian TV, have you been able to tune in, and how are they covering this?
Well, I don't watch it because it's all full of lies. I don't watch it.
You don't? Because we are hearing that they're covering the protests.
Yeah, I just watch Al Jazeera. I don't watch government TV.
Okay.
I speak on government TV. Incidentally, I spoke on the Nile TV a couple of days ago on Iran. I mean, I was asked to speak about the Iranian nuclear program, and they allowed me to say what I wanted, but it was in French. As long as you speak in French or in English, you can say what you want on the state television.
It's interesting that...
It could be another thing.
It's interesting the point you picked up there, that you don't agree with Hillary Clinton's comments. Do you not think, then, that if social reforms, even if they're deep and widespread, will that not be enough?
No, because that's not what people are asking for. They don't trust this regime. The regime is not trusted by anybody. It is thoroughly despised by people in the street, by the poor, by the rich, by the middle classes. Everybody despises them. They're considered to be American surrogates, stooges of American imperialism. That's what people say. They don't want them.
There must be some supporters of Hosni Mubarak.
Well, the people who make benefit out of it. I mean, all those who are making money out of it, yes. All the very, very rich people who have advantages because they're close to the power centers. Of course, they're very unhappy. The business community can't be very happy either.
How do you see this?
The Egyptian stock exchange is shooted by about 20%.
How do you see developments unfolding in the next couple of days? Do you think?
I'm a bit worried because if the army takes over, this is what's happening, is the army is probably going to take over. I'm a bit sort of, I have mixed feelings about the military taking over because they are very close to the United States. Most of the officer corps, the top officer corps, the generals, the people at the top of the army, have all been trained in the United States. They may even be paid privately from the American embassy. And it might be the Americans calling upon them to take over. And this is what is dangerous, what could be very dangerous.
And this is actually
as in Tunisia, the same thing happened in Tunisia. When the army took over, they still wanted the same crowd to stay in power.
This is something we've been discussing, actually. And it'll be interesting to know, what did you gauge from the protesters that were out on the streets with you? Are they picking up on this at all? Because there has been talk by some of our expert guests that this may be that the US goes to a plan B and does try to interfere in what's going on. Are Egyptian protesters at this time thinking about that? Or is it just a case that they're out on the street and they're just thinking, let's get Mubarak out for now and think about that later?
I think it's a second. They're not thinking about they're not thinking of repercussions. I think they just want him out. They don't go further than that. They don't think that the Americans can still recuperate because the army is the top brass in the army are very close to the Americans.
What do Egyptians make, those out protesting today, about Sir Mohammed al-Baradei?
Well, he's under house arrest. He was arrested this morning just as he came out of the mosque. So he wasn't even allowed to, because he wanted to go and join the protests. But he was incarcerated immediately. So was the head of a small party called the Democratic Front, a man called Mohammed Ghazali Harb. He's also been incarcerated. The other head of the tomorrow's party called El Ghad, Mr. Ayman Noor, who had dared to stand against Mubarak at the presidential elections 5 years ago and was in prison for 5 years for having done so. He has been severely wounded this morning. The police beat him up and he's in hospital.
But does Mohammed
al-Baradei heads of small parties? But this is what happens to people if they, important political figures who try to counter the government.
How much popular support, though, does Mohammed al-Baradei have?
Baradei, he had 1 million signatures, which is quite a bit. Supposing the army took over and appointed Baradei as prime minister, take over, sort of caretaker, I think people would be happy. Baradei is respected, but he's not a charismatic figure. He does not have a party behind him. He's just an individual, but everybody respects him. And he would certainly be an excellent caretaker president, preparing for democracy. We can't have democracy overnight, because for 58 years now, we've been totally deprived of it. It's been a police state since the revolution of 1952. People don't know what democracy is about. But if we could have an honest, sincere government in power of civilians, not of military people, this is what the people would want.
What about the Muslim Brotherhood? Have they been talked about at all in these protests?
Well, they have suffered many arrests since yesterday. 8 of their leaders are in prison, and several hundred of their sympathizers all over the country. They did not officially participate in these demonstrations, although individually they must have done. But officially they did not. They weren't part of a group of opposition parties that organized or didn't organize. They didn't organize this. This is an uprising, but who called for this uprising? So the Muslim Brotherhood, if they did participate, I'm sure they did, but they did in their individual capacity, not in their official capacity.
We spoke to Mohammed Ghanem
from the arrest, because most of the arrests are of Brotherhood people.
We spoke to Mohammed Ghanem, the Muslim Brotherhood representative in London. He said that the Muslim Brotherhood has been involved in these protests. He says, though, that the group is not putting itself forward as an alternative, as he called it. He said, we're not going out saying it's either Mubarak or us. What we're demanding is that Mubarak goes and that there are elections. And he did say that the Muslim Brotherhood will work with any person or any group that is democratically elected by the Egyptian people. Do you think that will be something popular and will gain them some more support?
Of course. I mean, this is an very intelligent way of looking at it. It is an intelligent way of looking at it, and I approve it and support it. I mean, what we would like eventually is a government similar to the one in Turkey.
Okay.
Like the government of Turkey. This is what we would like.
And there's been protests as well. I don't know how much you've been hearing, but there's been protests outside the country as well. Outside the Egyptian embassies in London, in Sweden, in areas of Germany. There's been really big protests in solidarity in Tunisia, to the point that those Tunisian protests in solidarity with the Egyptians, police have had to fire on them with tear gas. How important has Tunisia been, do you think?
Tunisia has been extremely important. I mean, Tunisia was the spark that gave hope to all these other countries suffering from repression and dictatorship. Tunisia showed that there was a way of getting rid of oppressive regimes by popular action. And without Tunisia, without what happened in Tunisia, I don't think anything would have happened in Egypt or in Jordan or in Yemen or in Algeria. It's spreading like wildfire. It's about time. I mean, these peoples have been oppressed for too long. They are run by stooges of American imperialism usually. And it's about time things changed. We should be masters of our own destiny and not stooges of American imperialism.
Said+zulficar, thank you for your comments. I do know that we'll be speaking to you again in about an hour's time for our news analysis, which of course is going to be on the top story of the day, Egypt. But for now, giving us the latest from Cairo itself, many thanks for your comments. Mark Glenn's is still on.